Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for March 4th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this episode. I do apologize for the Spotify and Apple Podcast audio listeners out there. This one might be a tough one because Brendan and I are going to communicate our review via signs that we've written down our thoughts, and we're going to go back and forth with signage.
That still might be pretty boring for the video watchers as well.
It could be. It could be. But imagine watching a whole movie of that.
Well, to be fair, it's not the whole movie.
It's not
but
the
it's
whole movie. Yeah.
It's at least the setup of the movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of it though. There's enough. There's certainly enough of it, and
There's
I
a lot
will
of
say,
words on screen.
Look, I'm sitting here joking about it, but in all reality, just to jump the gun before we actually begin the conversation, probably the best part of the movie. I think that's the best part of the movie. Yeah, is the signage.
We've got thoughts. Yeah, when it's a great start when the best part of the movie is when characters don't actually speak.
Yeah, they're not really talking, just holding up signs with written words on it.
I mean, I guess they learned something from Love Actually, right?
Yeah. I will say though, Anya Taylor-Joy's character of Jasa, a Russian sniper in this film, her English perfecto.
It's pretty
for
good.
Russian.
It's
really
pretty
good. Like the writing is just fantastic. Like you wouldn't have known that she was Russian. The just perfect grammar on those signs. Just absolutely.
She studied.
punctual.
Yeah, she found time to study as well as learning how to be a sniper.
Exactly.
Which I'm sure they
but
probably
really
teach you. You know,
Yeah.
I think secret operatives like this tend to know more than one language. So I guess we'll
Of
give her
course.
the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, exactly. I do love that about the film as well. All right, so we are obviously here to talk about The Gorge. This is currently streaming right now on Apple TV Plus.
Mm-hmm.
The latest from Scott Derrickson. We've talked about a few Scott Derrickson films over the years.
Yeah.
I guess as kind of an appetizer here, what are your thoughts on Scott Derrickson? Where do you sit? Are you a Derrickson head?
Am I a Derek, or wow, the ghost is really hating you right now?
The ghost is back. I edited that out of the last show, but you know what? I'm just gonna leave it in.
Just gonna keep it here.
Okay.
I mean,
it happened. The ghost just has its.
Yeah,
it loves to play tricks on me.
Well, let's think of it this way. What kind of movies does Scott Derrickson normally make? I mean, this is basically Sinister, right?
Yeah, that is true. He does love himself a horror film.
Yeah,
and has featured some ghosts in his movies before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think
maybe I just need to be delivered from hell. Deliver me from hell.
Deliver you from evil. Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
I haven't seen that one. The film with Eric Bana, I believe, is who stars in that one. I haven't seen that one. So I haven't seen everything that Scott Derrickson has directed. From what I have seen, I think he's pretty good. I think he's a pretty solid horror director, more specifically. I think some more successful than others. I feel like the film of his that many probably cite as his best is Sinister, and I might agree with that. I think that's a pretty effective film. I actually do quite like The Exorcism of Emily Rose. I think that's also a very effective film. That might actually be my favorite, even though I might sit here and say that Sinister is probably his best craft work as a horror craftsman, if that makes sense. But I do think Emily Rose is the more emotionally captivating experience of really any of his films. So I do like those two. I like Doctor Strange, but of course that's a Marvel movie. Can that really be qualified as a Scott Derrickson movie simultaneously? I mean, there are elements of his work in there. You can certainly sense that. But overall, I think he's a fair filmmaker for what he does. Certainly he has some successes, and I think he's pretty good at what he does.
Yeah, I am fairly mixed on Scott Derrickson. I really do like Doctor Strange. I think where Marvel was at that time, where you're post Avengers 2 and you're a few years until you get to the Infinity War and Endgame of it all. So like it was kind of that middle ground. You're into the third quarter, so to speak.
They had their rhythm still. They haven't lost their step, and they were still at a point where they could let their filmmakers kind of cook, right? There was still enough of a voice in their respective films.
And yeah, I thought it was really fun. But when you look at that film comparatively to the rest of his filmography, it is admittedly an outlier. But I do really like that film a lot. The Exorcism of Emily Rose, it's interesting because that's a film that, at least at the time, got fairly mixed reviews.
Yeah.
But it has garnered a cult following.
It has an audience.
Been reevaluated since it came out 20 years ago. Unbelievable. That was
it has, and that's the thing. He whether you like his films or not, you can't deny that Scott Derrickson has developed an audience. I do think he has an audience for his films, even if they weren't immediately, well received at the time. Even a movie like Sinister was not the most well received with critics, at least when it first came out. But there are studies, quote unquote studies out there that claim that Sinister is one of the scariest movies ever made. And these are studies conducted by those that actually work in the field of brain analysis and how movies can actually stimulate fear in you scientifically. A lot of them have said that Sinister is one of the scariest movies ever made based on that scientific fact. And I do think that's particularly interesting.
That is interesting.
But a movie like that does have an audience, and it's easy to see why. I don't think it's a great movie, but I do think it's an effective one at least.
I agree. I think it's quite effective. Maybe more so for me than you, at least in terms of the terror, because longtime listeners of the show will know I am what you call a scaredy cat.
Yep.
And especially at the time, I think that has diminished as time has gone on. And I've fallen in love with the genre over the last decade. But at the time, and that was 2012, I believe. So it would have been prior to the inception of In Session Film. At that time in 2012, oh, you better believe it. That one was a struggle to get for me.
I can only imagine.
For sure. So yeah, it was effective in that regard for sure. And people do really like that film a lot.
Yeah, they do.
The Black Phone, I feel like, got some interesting responses. I admittedly did not catch up with that film when it came out in 2021, so I can't really speak to it, but
it's getting a sequel.
It is getting a sequel, so I probably will catch up with it. And I do want to see it because I did hear interesting things, and I love Ethan Hawke, and I'm curious. I am curious for that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
But generally, I'm not going out of my way to see a Scott Derrickson film unless it's getting really great buzz, and maybe that'll pique my interest a little bit more. The Gorge, it's interesting. We're going to talk about it here. It admittedly wasn't our first choice for this week. Honestly, if there were more compelling movies out there that we had access to or time for, we probably would have skipped it. Or it may have come up on some sort of catch-up episode. I don't know if we would have been, featuring a conversation. But there wasn't much out there, and I do like this cast. Miles Teller, Anya Taylor-Joy, really great actors that I admire and appreciate. So, we were like, you know what? Given what's out there right now, let's give it a go. So here we are.
Yeah, so here we are. And, talking about Scott Derrickson, I think, is appropriate in leading up to this conversation because, like we said, he is able to develop an audience with his movies. Whether his movies are well received or not, they tend to garner some type of excitement. But we didn't really feel that for The Gorge, and maybe that's primarily because it was a streaming movie. A lot of people have talked about this probably would have been better served as a theatrical experience, and I can understand why people might say that. But as we were talking offline, just for a little inside baseball for everyone listening here and watching here, As we were getting ready for this review, you made a hilarious comment, JD, where you were pulling up the IMDb page and basically said, I had no idea Scott Derrickson even directed this until 5 minutes ago. So perhaps that's telling how we're going to feel about this one.
Yeah, I did not realize, like, as I was watching it, it didn't really feel like a Scott Derrickson film. I guess in hindsight, I can maybe see it in parts, but generally, it feels pretty thumbprintless. So, yeah, I mean, that's foreshadowing.
Well, and maybe that's why it's also not garnering the same type of excitement that Scott's films in the past have. There are too many factors here that just limit the Scott Derrickson we know to really come through.
For sure. And look, clearly I am not high on this film, and I just noted that maybe we were going to skip this film if there were better options out there. And there is truth to that. But given the circumstances, I didn't go in not wanting to like it. I was hoping to be surprised.
Sure.
I was hoping that I would come out liking it or appreciating it. We have another review coming out this week. In fact, that one might even come out before this one, if I'm being perfectly honest.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
If that is indeed what happens and you go and catch our conversation of Last Breath, that's a film that I also didn't have terribly high expectations for, but I found something to really appreciate and enjoy with that movie. So,
good dad movie? Is that what it was?
Yeah, good dad movie, some solid, crisp filmmaking to it. You know, I saw that in a theater. Maybe that's part of it as well. But I enjoyed my experience with that film despite its blemishes. So that's a film that in terms of the expectation level, not really all that dissimilar. But I did walk out of Last Breath not feeling underwhelmed. So, you know, I just want to lay those cards out there. I'm not coming into this completely cynical and, you know, I was hoping for the worst and we got the worst. That doesn't make for fun or interesting conversation.
No, that just reeks of arrogance, and we don't go for that here.
I was hoping to be surprised with this, especially given this cast.
Yeah, absolutely.
At any rate, let's go ahead and jump into this. It is directed by Scott Derrickson. It stars Miles Teller, Anya Taylor-Joy. It's mostly those two, but Sigourney Weaver does show up in a few scenes as well. If you're not familiar with the Gorge, I don't blame you. But just in case, two highly trained operatives become close after being sent to protect opposite sides of a mysterious gorge. When an evil emerges, they must work together to survive what lies within.
Wow. Okay. How long were you practicing that voice? That was pretty intense. Wow. Have you ever thought about voice work?
No, I don't know if I'd be good at it. I do have fun with it though.
Yeah, but that's a pretty lucrative career from what I understand.
Yeah. Who knows if this doesn't work out?
Voice work. There you go. Voice acting.
Change your career.
We'll start our own cartoon character series of movie reviews in different voices.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. What did you think about The Gorge?
I wanted to like this. I really did. And you sort of alluded to this already. We did not go into this with any cynical mindset. I really did want to like this one, but there's one name I have to call out here that I think is more telling of the final product, and that is screenwriter Zach Dean, whose previous films include the likes of The Tomorrow War. Remember that film with Chris Pratt, which kind of came and went?
Oh, my goodness.
I guess he was also a story creditor on Fast 10, whatever the hell it was called. So I think that type of talent is more on screen here than Scott Derrickson. It really does feel that way. It does feel like kind of I hate to call it a fake movie, but it does kind of have those qualities here. But I do think there is a lot of squandered potential. I think there's an interesting agenda with this movie that I think is compelling, that made me want to like it. And it really is this fusion of so many different genres. This is at once a monster horror movie, it's a romance movie, it's a sniper action movie, it's a military espionage movie. There are elements of military corruption happening here as well. You almost have like 5 or 6 different movies kind of morphing together to make this one thing. And there are times where I think that fusion isn't terrible. I think it's mostly when it's only Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy sharing scenes together in what feel like very plotless moments. This almost reminded me a little bit of, from earlier this year, the movie Hard Eyes. Remember that horror movie when we talked about how that was a really good rom-com, but maybe not a good horror slasher film?
Mhm.
I think a lot of similarities can be brought to The Gorge. I actually think it's pretty successful as a romance film, not so much anything else. And I found that really disappointing because I like what this movie may be going for. And it just made for an experience that is very, I don't know. This is like the perfect 2.5 out of 5 at best rating on Letterboxd for me. That almost means nothing. It kind of meant nothing for me by the end of it. And I was really bummed because I thought this had a really cool idea at play that I really wanted to see work.
Yeah, I think this film is the definition of bipolar. And by that, I mean, when it is acting as a romantic drama, if you will, with spurts of action thrown in from time to time, I actually did find myself enjoying it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's primarily the charm that you get with Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy. And I think they're really great together here in those scenes.
Good
if
chemistry.
This was just a romantic comedy / thriller, and the whole film was just them on those towers talking back and forth, having a few moments together. If that's all this was, I think I would have enjoyed it.
There's a decent
walked out
movie there.
satisfied.
They have very
Yeah.
solid chemistry.
I agree. Now, the audience is walking into this expecting more action and sci-fi. They would have been disappointed for sure. But I think there's a good movie there. Honestly, I think there's a really good movie there. Unfortunately, the film does get bogged down in its sci-fi tropes. And that's where this film is really, really bad, because all it is, when it is not acting as a romantic drama, it is essentially cutscenes from every World War II zombie video game you've ever played. It is the same basic plotting.
Sure.
It is the same derivative visuals and world building. The only thing that makes it watchable in those sequences is Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy, because they do have a dynamic that is still compelling.
Sure.
They're doing their best. They unfortunately cannot save this film from its vapid foundations. And it is a sludge to get through. Those sequences do not work for me at all. I think there are a few visuals that I admired in a vacuum, but
there are some creative visuals here at times.
But I think the rendering of them is still banal, because primarily, and admittedly, this comes from playing hours of these video games with my son, who loves those kind of movies, or those kind of video games, excuse me. The World War II zombie video game genre is his thing, or at least it was until he got wrapped up in VR. Now that's all he does.
That's all he wants now. He's found a new thing.
Like, it's hard to get him back into actual reality at times. But there was, a good chunk of time when we would play those games together. And this film is every cutscene. It is every plot point. I found myself rolling my eyes and laughing hysterically, not in the way that the film intended, because it's like it's like the screenwriter, what's his name? Zach Dean.
Yeah.
It's like Zach Dean was sitting there playing those games and was like, you know what? I'm just going to completely steal the plot point here, and I'm going to sell this to Apple, and we'll make a movie out of it. It's that lazily written.
No,
And
it
nothing
is.
against
Yeah.
Zach Dean. I don't know him, but the screenplay is not at all inspired in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you in that regard. And I do wonder if I have to give some blame to Scott Derrickson as well, because there are many moments here where I wish the film took itself less seriously. I mean, there is a dirgy kind of grungy quality to this movie, as if it actually is trying to emulate a real sense of dread and terror given the material at hand. And there is a goofiness to it that I don't necessarily dislike. I just don't know if that was the film's intent. And that's where I think it becomes problematic. Because to make the video game comparison once again, I feel like Zach Dean's goal here as a screenwriter, maybe even Scott Derrickson's goal as a director, I feel like they're really trying to challenge or channel a like a Last of Us type of energy here, or maybe even like an I Am Legend type energy here, and it just it doesn't get there. It absolutely doesn't get there, and I do think that's maybe where the bipolarity that you're talking about is most felt, because it really does feel like it's being pulled in very different directions. I would have loved if this were just a silent movie of Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy on those two east and west towers communicating via text on a page, and really elongating that sequence out. They actually meet physically a lot sooner than I would have liked, and then the actual meat of the movie starts to take place. But I thought that first third was pretty good. I thought the setup was actually not bad. I just really wish it would have stuck to that.
No, I agree. The initial opening of the film, the opening act, I thought was excellent. I completely agree. As I noted earlier, it's a really great setup to the film. It's a compelling romance drama, despite the characters still being kind of thinly veiled. We don't know too much about them, but I think the performances can make up that gap enough. Yeah. And they have great camaraderie together. And I did enjoy that. Honestly, if it stuck to its convictions as a romantic drama thriller, I would have enjoyed it. But it, of course, wants to be more than that. And I don't necessarily blame the film for wanting to be more than that.
No,
but
I can respect that idea.
Yeah, I don't think that its militaristic commentary works at all. Like all of that falls extremely flat. Everything in the gorge, once we get there, again, I just find it completely uninspired and going through the motions. That's all that it's doing. There's nothing interesting. Like, it plays out like you're watching cutscenes from a video game. That's how they made that movie. And it's not good. It's not good.
I find myself torn here because on one hand, I feel like I can argue that this is a movie that's, even though I don't think it's very good, it's not like the safe mediocrity that we always get, because I feel like the film is at least still trying for something. And then I also feel like the movie's trying for nothing at the same time. It's like there's kind of an unfortunate duality happening there, which is why I can't say I hated the movie, because I at least respect the idea of it trying to be this fusion of different genres that probably shouldn't ever fuse, but it's at least has a conviction to try to do that. But when it actually has the opportunity to tackle that vision, that's where it gets lazy. It's too I guess focused on just the idea as opposed to the execution. Which is why I say it's trying for something, but it's also not trying for anything. It somehow is both.
Well, I think my problem, more so than the visuals themselves or the idea that a lot of this derives from, it is the execution of those gorge sequences. Because if they followed the same plot lines, but they were able to maintain the romantic camaraderie that we had seen previously, I think it still could have worked. The problem is the film doesn't emphasize that romantic chemistry once they get down to the gorge. It is all about its plotting.
It is all about the gorge itself. And there's even there's a good portion where they even become separated for a little while too. And that's very bad plotting for the kind of movie that this is going for.
Which is why it feels so video gamey to me, right? Because they land on the gorge, immediate action sequence. They meet up, another action sequence. They get into a church. It's like you're upping the level of the video game each time. And then the one break we do get where they find themselves in a bunker and there's computers, and it's a reveal that you would absolutely get in a video game like this,
Oh,
where
yeah.
we have to
yeah.
get to some exposition to explain why the characters are in this predicament. And the dialogue that these characters are forced to deliver is straight out of a cutscene in a video game.
And
It
it's
is
so silly.
extremely banal. It's so goofy. Like,
They don't
none of
play
it
it.
makes
They don't
any
play it
sense.
goofily, though, and that's the weird thing. It's like they should have played it more goofily, given how goofy the writing is. Like they have to be aware of how silly this is.
Yeah.
And
Like,
they're not playing into that.
and I know that, like, if you've never played a video game, then it might not register
Mhm.
how deeply derivative it is. But like,
Yeah.
if you play any of those video games, like when Miles Teller sits at that computer and he's going through and finding these files and everything that this, mysterious company is doing, that is cutscene 101.
Yeah.
Like, you've seen that in every one of those
This-
videos, like, because we have to get to that information, and it comes so manufacturedly. Right?
This
Like,
is- yeah.
it's ridiculous.
This is such a weird movie for Apple TV Plus. It really is, because Apple, with regard to their films, and they have the strangest business model when it comes to their movies, whether it be how they're made or how they're distributed, because a lot of their movies are pretty expensive, even if they don't really make all that much money. I mean, Apple is the one that put all this money into play for movies like Killers of the Flower Moon, right? Like
Yeah.
they have such a strong revenue stream outside of just their streaming platform that they can kind of get away with really expensive chance-taking movies. The Gorge really feels like an outlier. This feels more like a Netflix movie than anything else. And I was like, I did find that pretty surprising, because even some of the visuals feel very digitally rendered that you would normally get in a more Netflix-like environment. It all feels too clean and too polished, which is another reason why I think some of the critics out there who may or may not have gone for this have argued this probably would have been better as a theatrical experience. And I think I would agree, because maybe it
Yeah.
would have been better seeing this in a way that didn't feel so clean and polished. I think that would have maybe added something to it, but it's too colorful and too shiny of a product that it kind of falls into those same trappings that we see many streaming films falling into. And I think it really hurts this movie simultaneously.
No, yeah, it absolutely feels like it was made for streaming. The numbers that I'm seeing here is that it was made for around $50 million, $50 to $70 million, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Jeez, like that's not that cheap, honestly.
It's not cheap.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would have made that money at the box office. I do think it
Yeah.
would have struggled to do that kind of business. But to your point, I think given what this film is, I would have likely enjoyed it more as a theatrical experience, because it does spend a lot of time in the Gorge. There are a lot of action sequences here, and they do put some money into the visuals and the sound design of the film that might have felt more visceral in a theatrical setting. But I don't think it would have been able to escape its fundamental issues narratively.
Oh, no.
And
No.
again, how uninspired this is. And that's ultimately its biggest
Yeah.
issues. Like, this
Yeah.
is a film that just doesn't really know what it wants to do. It just feels like it's a movie that they did just to have one, like just to do a job.
Yeah, it does feel like a quota. It feels like a quota
Yeah.
movie or something.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, what are you guys doing next Thursday? You guys want to get together and make a movie? We
Well,
can do it in 2 days. I
Yeah,
think.
well, I'll tell you who was only there for a few hours. That was Sigourney Weaver.
She might have done that performance from her house. Like, just CGI me in later. Like, yeah. I mean, but this is how you know that the movie cost some money, because it does have Sigourney Weaver in literally like 3 scenes.
Yeah.
Like, she showed up on set, literally a day's work. There's no
Yeah.
way that her involvement was more than a day. And then
Yeah.
Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy, like you have 3 prominent actors in this movie. You got Scott Derrickson directing it, and it is CGI heavy. So there is money being poured into it. I don't know why you would make it so drab.
Well, that's the other unfortunate thing, because not only is there talent on screen and behind the camera with Scott Derrickson, there's even more talent behind the camera. Dan Louston shot this movie. He's the cinematographer here, and he's most known for working with
Reznor and
Guillermo del
Atticus
Toro.
Ross did the score for this?
Oh yeah. I was about to bring that up as well. If there's another romance to this movie outside of just Anya Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller, it's Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. I do think the score is pretty good. I do
I'll
think
be
the
honest,
music.
I'll have to go back and listen to it. I did not.
I mean, it's not musical, but I think it fits the tone of what they're going for. It's really more of a sound effect than it is a musical score, but I think it kind of works. It's at least interesting. But to my point earlier, there is talent involved here.
Sorry,
clearly
I didn't mean to undercut your point
No,
there
you're
about
good.
Dan Louston, and because I agree with that point. But as you were talking there, I saw Reznor and Ross, and I'm like, "What the hell? No way! That is
I'm surprised you didn't know that.
I'm being lied to. Had no idea." And that goes back to, I guess, the joke that we had made earlier. Even though it was explicitly more about Derrickson and not feeling his presence here, I would say the same thing about every one of those names we just brought up. I don't sense Reznor and Ross at all in that score. But to be fair to them, it just could be the film overall and how underwhelming everything is that the score just registers in the background and you don't really notice.
Just kind of
it
sits
because
there.
They're so bored by this film. That could be part of it. I admittedly did not hear a single note of the score. I couldn't tell you anything about it. Nothing about the score to this film.
I remember how it made me feel trying to listen to the score outside of the context of the film. And I remember thinking, okay, that's at least interesting. It's at least trying to do something creative. And I can feel like the seeds of creativity that this movie could have had blossoming just a little bit. But of course, they then get drowned by sludgy water. So that it can't quite make its way out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah, this film is not good. I don't like it. I don't know if it's as bad as Love Hurts.
Oh, it's definitely not that bad.
Yeah, I don't think it's the worst film I've seen, but I'm not a fan.
It's
not a fan. I
better
will
than the
forget
Monkey.
about this movie by the end of the week.
It's better than The Monkey. I'll say that.
It's better than The Monkey. I agree. It's The Monkey. The Gorge is better than The Monkey.
That'll be the poster quote from us when we advertise our review for this one.
Exactly. Yeah, but like generally I will forget about this film within a week's time. I don't think there's anything memorable about it. Unless, to your point, I go back and listen to that score and it works great outside of the context of the film. And it might, because it's Reznor and Ross, and I don't necessarily want to doubt them. But in the context of the film, on a first viewing anyway, I didn't really notice anything about it. But there's really not much to notice here outside of Taylor Joy's chemistry in those early scenes, which are really great.
Which is good. Yeah. I mean, there's at least a great thing there.
And as cut scene video gamey as the middle section of the film is, like I would have taken it verbatim if, at least visually, technically speaking, if narratively they slowed down to focus more on that relationship. But they don't.
They don't.
They don't. And the only time that whole section slows down at all, it's for really, really dumb, asinine exposition.
Yeah, I would have loved this more had it just been like a 75-minute meet cute before it got to the meat of the story.
Yeah, I agree. All right, that's my review. That's our review. That's The Gorge. I don't think I have anything else to add.
I'm done.
That's it. All right. It's available on Apple TV Plus if you want to go and see it. If you decide to skip it, which I think you should, You're not missing anything. So that's it.
That's it. Simple.
Okay. If you agree or disagree with anything we have to say here, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. All right. Well, with all of that said, as I noted, we have another review, Last Breath, that is available. You can go and check that out. Episode 626 was really fun. We brought on Gerald from the Awards Garage to talk about the Oscars. We continued our Best Picture movie series with West Side Story. That was a really fun conversation. It was obviously a longer show given that we coupled the review with the Oscars, but
yeah,
you know, it is what it is. It was a big week, so
lots,
a lot going on the show, but I do look forward to moving post Oscars because the last few days has been extremely exhausting. I think the irony of this whole review, Brendan, and obviously we were not positive on the Gorge, I much prefer having this conversation than being on social media right now because, good Lord, the discourse is exhausting. More exhausting than the Gorge.
This is why we say the movies that we love, we don't want them to win Best Picture. We don't want it to happen.
That's it. That's exactly why. What we've seen in the last 2 days is why I don't like turning art into sports. It is utterly ridiculous. Absolutely vapid nonsense. The conversation on Anora right now.
It's a good movie.
Anyway.
That's all I'll say.
I guess that's our final thoughts. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Well, I was just going to say it might get even more exhausting when we get to episode 627 is our next main show, where we continue our Best Picture movie series of the 1960s with Lawrence of Arabia, which means the first half of that show will be the first half of the movie. The second half of that show will be a review of the second half of that movie.
There's going to be a lot of Lawrence of Arabia. There's no doubt about that. So I very much look forward to getting into that conversation for sure. Also, go check out Chasing the Gold this week. Shadon and Erica talk about the Oscars. There's a new Women in Session coming out tomorrow as well. Be on the lookout for that. With that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Not good. This one
made you want to gorge your eyes out?
Yes.